You're listening to Where We Are, a weekend conversation on faith, politics, family, and culture, hosted by me, Michael Ware, and my wife, Melissa. We bring our wide-ranging experiences in politics, ministry, and nonprofit life to bear as we discuss the issues of the day. On this week's episode, we'll be talking about the UAW strike and how both of the leading candidates in the 2024 presidential election are inserting themselves. We'll also talk about new Pew data on how the American people are thinking about our politics. This is Where We Are. This is Where We Are. We are the Wares. I'm Michael.
I'm Melissa.
Melissa, we are like 12 hours away from the Buffalo Bills. We're going to see the Buffalo Bills game in Washington.
Yes.
Well, really Landover, Maryland. But we're really excited. I think it'll be a good game. This Sam Howell kid for the Commanders is pretty good.
I have no idea who that is,
but
I'll take your word for it.
He's no Josh Allen.
No. Oh, so he's a quarterback. Okay, got you.
yeah. He is no Joshy Allen, I'll tell you that much. Very excited to. It's like my first Bills game in 2 or 3 years. So
well, we went and saw the Ravens last year.
Oh my goodness!
How could you forget? That was a fantastic game.
Completely forgot. But
yes, it's going to be cold
great.
and rainy, but that
great.
is the perfect kind of Bills game. Hopefully we'll be sitting amongst a bunch of Commanders fans and we'll just be the most annoying ever.
Shouldn't be hard. All right. Anything else you want to talk about? We'll just remind folks, we're about a month and a half away from the For the Good of the Public Summit, run by the Center for Christianity and Public Life in D.C., and would love to see you join us in Washington for that event. You could visit ccpubliclife.org to learn more about it and to register. We are also, Melissa, I'm looking at the calendar here. The book comes out in 4 months.
That's right, 4 months.
Spirit of Our Politics comes out in 4 months. So, gosh, we're really getting close here. And then tomorrow will be 2 months away from Saoirse's birthday.
I know.
No. Okay.
Lots coming up.
A lot coming up. We also have a lot to talk about.
We do.
In the news. Mm-hmm. Next week, I believe, we'll be next week we'll be doing our monthly rankings
of the GOP and pasta.
GOP candidates and pasta. Yes,
and
there are more pasta shapes to cover.
And we'll be able to make those rankings in light of the next
Republican
debate, which is happening this coming Wednesday, which is exciting. In California. And Governor Doug Burgum just qualified. So we think that so far the only person who hasn't qualified that was on the last debate stage is former Governor Asa Hutchinson. And the news is that Donald Trump will not be on the debate stage, but that actually leads us into our first conversation quite well.
If he's not going to be at the debate, Melissa, where will he be?
He might be on the picket line.
Nope.
What?
Very unlikely that it's possible he joins the picket line, but he will be in Detroit.
Making
Let's get the facts straight. So this is the scene that's going to play out next month, which is on Tuesday, or next week. On Tuesday, President Biden is headed to Detroit to join the picket line.
I got him confused with that guy. Sorry.
To join the picket line of the UAW strike. And then the next day, counter-programming. You'll remember last month, Donald Trump counter-programmed the Republican debate with his interview with Tucker Carlson. This month, he will be going to Detroit to speak to current and former union members. He has been sending. He's been saying that he's on the side of the workers. He's saying that the Biden administration has sold them out through their promotion of electric vehicles, and we have a really interesting dynamic here, Melissa. Of we could see next week both the leading Republican candidate and somewhat historically sitting U.S. president joining picket line of a major strike. We could see both Biden and Trump take the side, at least in their presentation, in their affect, take the side of labor in this major strike. Now, I will note the head of the UAW has not been very welcoming of Donald Trump's words of affirmation. The head of the UAW has said that Donald Trump and electing billionaires like him has been part of the problem, that people like Donald Trump can't relate to those who are working paycheck to paycheck. And so, but here's the thing, Melissa, like, I think Trump is saying, like, who like, there's a significant percentage of those folks who might listen to Trump over their union leader, who might, and so it is. I don't think there's anyone else in the Republican Party, certainly no one else running for president, I don't think, maybe I'll be proven wrong, who would even allow for the appearance that they're siding with labor in this dispute. They'd be worried about campaign donations or big donors getting skittish. Many of them just have principled objections to unions. And so it's going to be an interesting week. And I'll say, I think the Biden folks have been defensive, and really rightfully so. If Trump is able to make further gains among working class voters, which Biden just values in terms of who he is in this profile, but also are an important part of his path to reelection. It could be a real problem. So it'll be interesting to see how this plays out next week.
Yeah, you were saying to me on the side yesterday that should Trump be seen as successful in his visit and his talks with current and former union members, and a narrative builds around it, that it's just extremely interesting to watch the Republican Party. Republican Party used to have a strong, worker voter, and then the Dems took over that kind of vote for many decades. And, the Democrats have been like the blue collar party for quite a while, but we've seen an erosion of that since 2016. And with Trump making moves like this, that pretty much, like you're saying, no other GOP candidate so far is showing that they would be willing to do. But since he has brought the GOP in a bunch of different directions that they haven't wanted to go in, it's very interesting to think about, will there be a further erosion in the 2024 campaign for the Democrats on with working voters?
Yeah.
And what would that look like for the future for 2028 and beyond?
Right. And we're going to get to this, keep this in mind. We're going to talk a bit later in this episode about like the potential for real political realignment in this country. And like, this is like one of those dynamics that could prompt, significant realignment, which is, if you have a Republican nominee who is, again, at least trying to be seen as siding with labor. And we'll see, maybe he surprises, maybe he has a different message on Wednesday. But if he has at least sort of pro-labor sounding rhetoric, or at least like pro, working class rhetoric, like where do Republican donors go? Like where does so much of the Republican like media infrastructure go? And if the answer is, well, to like the corporatist quote unquote like corporatist wing of the Democratic Party, okay, but maybe what changes does that entail then, in the Democratic Party, and in response, what opportunities does that open up in the Republican Party? I will say, I think part of the answer is you don't need to look to the future for that. I think we're seeing some of those dynamics play out in this moment, and this week, what happens in Detroit, I think, will be a milestone in determining just how far that current trajectory and that current sort of line of political development goes. But I'll be watching closely, as of course I'm watching the strike closely because of its significance way beyond sort of politics in 2024. But depending on how long the strike goes for, the extent to which it expands, very significant for the U.S. economy and the global economy, really.
And for climate change efforts.
Yeah, sure.
I mean, the whole thing, because a lot of it, the linchpin sort of for me seems to be around electric vehicles and figuring out how does the auto industry via its workers figure out how to be ambitious towards that end while also ensuring that folks still have jobs and the pay that they wish to have. Yeah, it'll be very interesting, especially because the Biden administration has been hanging a lot of its hat on electric vehicles as being a sort of signature part of Biden's climate change policies that's been recently, passed in some legislation over the last year. But I think this is actually a good transition into an article that I found just yesterday, because we're going to talk about these new Pew numbers that are in about how Americans view our politics. And oh boy, it is chock full of data that's really interesting. But right before we get to that, especially because we're talking about some economic things here, is there's an article in the Financial Times that was just published a couple of days ago, and it's on zero-sum thinking. It's towards what zero-sum thinking does for the American or the British economy, but I actually was thinking about this article more towards what does it do to our politics, and especially to the generations coming up and how they view wider society in general. And so this Financial Times article we'll be putting in the top 5 on Substack, and that's where you can go and check it out. It's from a new study out of Harvard University. And it says that basically there is a predilection for zero-sum thinking, or the belief that for one group to gain or another must lose. That's really prevalent right now, especially amongst young people. And this has implications, obviously, for economics, this article says, because there is a growing body of evidence that a worldview of zero-sum thinking, that in order for me to gain, you must lose, that it's associated with demotivating beliefs, or the sense that extra effort is not rewarded, and in turn, that lowers the rate of innovation at the societal level. And so this article is completely occupied with like very capitalist aims of like, what is these demotivating, less innovation, what does that do to our economies in the United States and the UK? But for me, this really brings up this idea of very cutthroat way of thinking, a way of thinking that's very dour, very hopeless, very self-serving, very Machiavellian, like that sort of thing. And, they have a chart in this article, again, showing that younger people have this zero-sum thinking far more than much older generations who sort of viewed things positively and that you could basically get ahead in life by working harder through effort, whereas most people are now thinking that, especially young people are thinking that it's just pure luck, and that's how you get ahead. And I think that zero sum thinking is something that I've been noticing for very long time in our politics. And I mean, Michael, you have written around this a lot, especially with reclaiming hope and like hope in politics and what does that actually mean, and how that's actually really difficult to kind of approach things in that way, because everything is geared towards a very cutthroat, I win, you lose type of mentality. And I think it leads into some of these Pew numbers very well. But I just want you to comment on that if you'd like to before we jump into some of these Pew data that's brand new.
Yeah, look, I mean, as far as the particular context of the article, right, there are moral hazards on both sides.
Mm-hmm.
You know, a zero-sum mentality is dangerous because it can lead you to think, well, for a number of reasons, but it can lead you to think, like, the people are winning are cheating. And they're doing everything to maximize their advantage. And so I need to do everything. Like, that's the environment we're in. And like the downward spiral of like rationalization and the kind of culture that creates is like profoundly antisocial. But
and it also leads to conspiracy. It's why we see so many conspiracy theories, besides access to technology in which we can spread those conspiracy theories. But this type of thinking at its base also has you thinking, oh, is that other person cheating? Or, oh, that other
like,
person
this is
getting
not meritocratic.
This other person is getting some insidious form of help.
Right.
And therefore, I'm never going to get a leg up. So it's demotivating in that way. And that, like, you get people who don't want to vote. You get people who think that the system is helpless. You get people who think nothing is ever going to change. You get to all those kinds of attitudes, which do have, you know, kernels of truth and some merit, like that sort of thing. But not the conspiracy part, but some of the rationality that comes afterward.
Yeah, I mean, so the author of the op-ed, John Byrne Murdoch, who's the financial economics columnist for the Financial Times, does helpfully, I think, note the quote from the article: "No one is arguing that this shift towards zero-sum thinking, and particularly in this context that." Success is a matter of luck rather than effort. Quote from the op-ed: "No one is arguing that this shift in mindset is not justified. When the pie was growing rapidly, the average person's material circumstances were indeed more liable to improve without the aid of luck or connections. And if developed societies are more concerned with fairness, that is no bad thing." And then he goes on to note some of the things that you were just noting, you know, even to the extent that it's based on real economic factors, mm-hmm. that also doesn't mean that there are real problems with zero-sum thinking and this kind of approach. He talks about populism, conspiracy theories, nativism, etc. And so yeah, no, I think I think it's you know, and an interesting dynamic. I do think the idea that this isn't just a frame of mind issue, but that it is contingent on like how people's lives are. So the article goes through charts of like, if your first 20 years were lived during times of mm-hmm. slow GDP growth, then you were more likely to have some of these, you know, what the author calls like zero sum beliefs. And so there is that, like, it's not just a frame of mind, it's a connection to like the experiences you've had. I do want to wrap up the point I was making, though. So there's moral hazard on the zero sum side. There's also moral hazard on the side of everything I have is a result of my effort. If other people were putting in as much effort as I did, they would have what I have. And there can be a sort of lack of empathy, actually the idea that, why should we be helping people if everyone has an equal shot at success. And so there are cautions on both sides, to be sure.
Yeah, definitely. And with this new Pew data that just came out, which is on Americans' views of our national politics, it made me think of one. Just to start off with, one of the big data points that's in this study, where they asked, how do you? They gave them some emotions of and they asked a bunch of folks, how do you feel? Do you feel exhausted, angry, hopeful, or excited? And 65% of people always or often feel exhausted right now. 55% always or often feel angry, and just 10% always or often feel hopeful, and 4% always or often feel excited. And when they ask folks, okay, give your own descriptors of how you think about our politics, and people were able to put out, some words that, first came to mind, they said that only 2% of the time, just 2% of the time, respondents would give a positive adjective. And when it comes to the zero-sum thinking, I wanted to make this connection a little bit here, to be thinking about this, that when you have that kind of thinking, yes, hope and excitement, any kind of positivity is really difficult to find, because you're basically always in a defensive posture, and you can't really sort of pry anything really buoyant out of that kind of posture. But we've got that data point on how people are feeling.
Yeah, let me jump in here, because what it speaks to also, and this is in the data, is this it used, for a period, we had both affective polarization, which or negative polarization, which is more about how much you dislike the opposing party than it is about loving the party you support. There was a period of time in which, yes, negative polarization was rising, but that coincided with also really high positive views of your own party.
Yes.
So people could, both things were happening. People liked their own party, and they really didn't like, the opposing party. And that was troublesome when you saw this rise of the deep antipathy towards the opposing party, even though it, again, coincided with these positive feelings. What we're seeing in this data is a rise in affective polarization being higher than ever, but sort of people's positive views of the political party plummeting. And so it's like the affective, the negative is supplanting the positive, not just coinciding with it, which is deeply, deeply problematic, and in some ways anti-democratic. If you have a politics that is running on the engine of opposition that really isn't even rooted in positive conviction, because we're seeing people don't like the party they're in increasingly. This isn't entirely, but for instance, this Pew data found for the first time ever the highest percentage that it has of people who like neither party
Yeah,
think it's over
it's
a
at
quarter, 28%.
it's at 28%, which is the highest in the 3 decades they've run this.
So, my questions are always still the same about this, which are okay, they don't like either party, but how much of the 28% can actually agree on anything among themselves? Like, because even the Pew data and a lot of the coverage alludes to, you know, and another finding of this Pew data is really increasing desire for multiple parties.
Yes.
But there's always this question of, okay, 28%, that's not even a third still of the country that doesn't like either party. And how much of that 28% can even agree with one another? Like is there a cohesive movement? But I have to say, Melissa, I'm becoming more and more skeptical of my skepticism. I think
That's
that
funny.
I think that there is, and I've been saying this for years. We're at a time of real political disruption, and yes, there are huge hurdles to third parties. But the environment is certainly more favorable for that than it has been since at least, I'd say, Perot. So at least, almost 30 years. But Melissa, what do you think? Anything else to stick out to you about this data?
Yeah, so another thing, and I mean, just in general, I think that it's people's views towards the political parties are bleeding into this view, but then this view is also driving into political parties, and essentially it's that just 16% of the public says that they trust the federal government always or most of the time. And that trust has sort of been sitting really low for about 20 years now, Pew says. And today it's among the lowest levels dating back 70 years. And so I think about that one because when it comes to the political parties operate in a federal government system, and so it's like the federal government is kind of like the base here of what we're talking about. And in order for any sort of system that large to work, and honestly the idea of democracy really has to be based on trust, this idea of trust, that no matter how big it is, how small it is, that the people inside it and the people that you elect are for you and for your good and are working towards your good. And for it to be very low for about 20 years now, I think we're starting to see the fruits of that distrust just sort of permeating out everywhere else with how people view the parties. And I think with also things like, the rise of technology, the rise of mass information, the rise of zero-sum thinking potentially, there's a bunch of obviously factors here as well that I think are leading to that kind of hyperpolarization as well. But I think that we don't talk about this issue of trust enough when we're having these conversations, even though we've got the data sitting in front of us quite often, and it's getting lower and lower.
Yes. So Melissa, as you know, but our listeners don't, I have a whole section on this in the first chapter of the new book. And I've been thinking about it just as I've been doing edits, so the first chapter of my book, I'll just say it here. The first chapter of my book is really just an overview and context setting about the state of our politics today. And so there's a section on this trust issue. And I do think in the faith context, it can become in some ways more complicated than it needs to be. Because I think some people here in one strain of sort of rhetoric and thinking and theology and good theology, there's this idea that don't put your trust in princes, don't put your trust in anything but Jesus. And so there's a certain strain of Christian thought that I think there's a mode of Christian thinking which is good, trust in government is down. But I want to, what we're talking about here is not sort of ultimate placing your trust in government.
Oh yeah. Yes.
It's just it's it's social trust.
Yes,
It's like
that's what I'm
basic
getting at.
love. No,
Yeah.
no, I know that's what you're getting at, but it's I think some listeners might be
Oh,
thinking like, what's
100%
the problem
with that. Yes.
with that? And it's yes, we absolutely don't want people putting their trust in government, particularly not in like an ultimate sense. But it is a sign of real social decay when you see this sort of decline in trust in this particular way, which is Melissa just laid out, is not sort of people entrusting their hopes and futures
Yeah.
in government. It's people thinking that government is out to get them.
Yes.
It's people thinking that everyone in government is self-serving and self-seeking, and that there's no service happening in government at all. And like the trajectory of what you have when you have such a high percentage of Americans who are unwilling, unable to say that there's some kind of baseline level of trust that they have with government and the way government is functioning. That is a strain on how society functions.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Thanks for clarifying that so that everybody's listening knows exactly what I meant, because it's one of the main ways that we organize ourselves as an American society. When you sit down and think about it, if you drive on a road, if you access Medicaid or Medicare, if you you go and sign a marriage certificate so that your marriage is real, you're accessing all kinds of and different, obviously different levels and different sectors of government, but you are accessing government. And it is one of the biggest ways that we organize ourselves. And if our trust in one of the biggest ways that we organize ourselves is so low and has been trending low for 20 years, we can't help but then take what is trust in such a like sort of obviously like a very systematic wide thing, and then our trust in the politicians obviously to be very low, for Congress, for our constantly, we don't have trust in Congress. Like 9% of people approve what's going on in Congress. It permeates down into actual people, your neighbors.
Yes.
If you can't trust some of the biggest systems that that not just control but govern how your lives are run, you're not going to trust all the people around you, whether or not they're serving in government or if they're just happen to be your neighbor next door who works in HR for some company,
well, and
et cetera, et cetera.
Yes, like what I think it's important to view this as a part of overall decline in social trust more broadly. So instead of Christians looking and seeing, well, decline in government is down, decline in media is down, as wow, like they're government media are really doing a poor job. You also need to look at the fact that decline in the church is going down, decline in religious institutions broadly is going down, decline in military is a decline of trust in military is going down. Like these are all of a piece. This isn't. The decline of trust in government, to me, is not about some positive development of people like letting go of the idolatry of government. No, actually, I think the decline of trust in government actually betrays a greater idolatry of government because of the kinds of things that are motivating it and our sort of political loyalties more broadly. And so I don't know how you turn the ship around, but I think there needs to be a greater awareness that I don't think you turn I think social trust is going to be restored across the board, or nearly across the board, or in many sectors, or it's going to continue to decline. I don't think that there's like a future in which people are going to distrust business, government, media, military, and like trust in the church is going to skyrocket.
When
Maybe I'm wrong on that. I
we
don't
could
see
always be
that
wrong.
trajectory happening.
Yeah, I mean, when you sort of marinate in negative feelings and there's no other place to marinate, you're just going to always be marinating in negative. I mean, that sounds very rote and kind of very an easy conclusion to make, but that's just I don't see randomly us being able to trust a certain institution, especially the church, at some point out of nowhere if some of these other things, because they all correspond to our social cohesion as a country. But I also think, especially on like the 10% of people actually always or often feel hopeful. I think all of these numbers, especially if they're going this low for the first time in the last 30 years since Pew has been running this particular data set, is that there is just a giant opening to be able to just sort of disrupt these ways of thinking, these ways of operating. And there are a couple things in here about like having more political parties, and a lot more people are in support of having more than one party. And then they ask about campaign political finance, and 72% of people would in the United States would like for there to be more limits on how much you can spend in campaigns, and that would improve a lot of things. So they've got a couple of proposals in there of like how could we turn some of this systemic stuff around. But there's just such a giant opening where there's a certain point where we could go lower. I don't know where it would actually bottom out, but even now, with 10% of people only feeling often or always hopeful, that to even just counterculturally work, disrupt this kind of stuff, it's so ripe, and obviously it's not going to take one organization or one person. It's going to have to be multiple people, whole communities of people, whole communities of churches working towards this end, in terms of getting our politics to a better place, in terms of people feeling like it's for service again, in terms of people feeling like it is for me, not against me, that it is for my flourishing and my family's flourishing, that sort of thing, those types of attitudes and behaviors.
Yeah, no, and I think that's the future we need to work towards and really fight for. But I think that takes us through what we wanted to cover on this week's episode. As always, thank you for listening. Really appreciate you being a part of this community. You can go to whereweare.substack.com to learn more, to subscribe.
You can also go to your favorite podcast app and rate us.
Yes.
Leave a review. We love reading our Apple reviews, so go and leave a review if you haven't.
And thank you for being part of this community. I am traveling this week. I'm not sure that we'll be able to do a live feed for the debate this week, but if we do, you'll get an email in your inbox if you're a subscriber at whereweare.substack.com. All right. Hope you have a great rest of your weekend, and we'll talk to you next week. This is Where We Are.
Bye.
It's the end of the weekend, but I still wanna turn up. Yeah, I still wanna turn up. All I want is to go again, but you ain't picking your